Welcome back to Joe Stoner Boxing. Over the weekend, there was, believe it or not, a Don King card on. Who'd have believed it? 92 years young King. I suppose when you think about it, I mean, Bob Arum's 91, but I get the impression he's sort of just a figurehead now. With his King cards, I think he's probably still got his hand on the pulse of everything that's going on. But as usual, it was a case of, the venue was small. I think it was in Miami, this card. It looked like it was in a small auditorium. The production values were low. I mean, if you're old enough to remember King when he was in his pomp and circumstance, his cards were immense. I mean, they were giants. So, you could get 5 world title fights at different weights. King, ruled the heavyweight division for many years in the probably the 80s and the 90s, a lot of the 80s and a lot of the 90s. So, how the mighty have fallen, yeah, but bear in mind the age he is. What do you expect? 92 years old. The whole thing smacked of, almost a series of club fights posing as something more. But anyway, let's talk a bit about one of the heavyweight bouts that took place between TREVOR BRYAN and CASSIUS CHANEY. Now, Bryan, you will know, last seen getting knocked out by Daniel Dubois in 4 rounds, and that was about 16, 17 months ago. He was a former WBA regular champion, meaning he's not the champion. he's got that sort of, secondary low-fat belt. But talking of fat, he came in to this fight with a huge tyre around his middle, wobbling around. I mean, I'm in better shape than he is, and Christ, that's saying something. Just out of shape, big gut on him, wobbling around. But, 34 years old, 6'4", has never torn up any trees, really. I think he won that regular belt. I think he won the interim belt from BJ Flores, who he stopped in 4 rounds. That was back in 2018. Then further down the line, I think Bermain Stavern, he won the regular belt against an ancient Bermain Stavern, who he stopped in 11 rounds. Stavern had absolutely nothing left, was shot to bits. Then he defended it a couple of times, and on the second time he got flattened by Daniel Dubois. So, yeah, very much a sort of C+ heavyweight. That's about it. CASSIUS CHANEY, 2 years old at 36, 2 inches taller at 6'6". He came in with 22 wins with 15 KOs, 1 defeat, and the defeat was to George Arias, and that was back in 2021. He lost a split decision, and Arias, you may know, in his last fight, got flattened in 3 rounds by Jared Anderson, just to give you some perspective. Well, since then, CASSIUS has fought a journeyman in 2022. He knocked that in a round, and this was his first fight since then, so no activity on the guy. Can pop a bit, Bryan came in with 22 wins and 15 KOs. So it's a similar sort of record, similar record. Anyway, the fight starts and you're thinking, oh my God, is this in slow motion? Because Bryan came out, just hanging his left hand low, jabbing, no real commitment behind the jab, wobbling around. His old tummy was going here, there, and everywhere. His stomach was probably doing more work than his hands, actually. But he was trying to control a range with the jab, not particular, no real determination there. But CASSIUS CHANEY wasn't really doing anything. He just sort of took a step forward, then another step forward, then another, and all the while Bryan slightly moving back. There was really nothing going on. You thought, my God, what's this? Then in the second round it came to life, because Chaney was looking for the right hand. He loves that overhand right. And Bryan, he didn't get a few warning signs. He got a dozen warnings with bells, whistles, and dancing rah-rah girls, right? But he wouldn't get out of the way of the right hand. In the second round, Chaney landed it and put Bryan over. Bryan got up, was shaky, but he managed to see out the round. Obviously a 10-8 round for Chaney. Chaney did, that kind of boosted his confidence, or so it seemed. He went after him. It was all a bit slow motion, but he was ragging on Bryan. So Bryan gets out of the round. In the 4th round, Chaney puts it on him again. Doesn't put him on the floor, but is getting closer and landing punches. And again, the overhand right, he couldn't miss with that. CASSIUS CHANEY even threw a couple of jabs, which was amazing. But over the 5th and 6th rounds, Bryan started to jab with a little bit more intent, and Chaney for some reason switched off. Now this was a 10-rounder, and Chaney looked like he was huffing and puffing. I think that's the inactivity. I don't think he was in particularly great shape himself. Aesthetically he looked good, but you know, you can look good. You can look like you've been in the gym, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're fighting fit. And Bryan, for all the flab of him, has done, you know, distance fights quite a fair bit. So he was kind of beginning to turn the tide a little bit in the 5th and the 6th. But then in the 7th, towards the end of the 7th, Chaney started to fire those overhand rights again, and they were connecting. He even threw a left hook in that landed and shook Bryan, and it was very, very ominous. You know, Bryan starts to look a bit ragged. He's sort of swaying around, you know, a bit like a weeble, wobbling but not falling down. But then he got caught on the ropes, and there was a couple of overhand rights had already landed, probably about 3 or 4 actually in the preceding minute. But one of them came over the top, bang on the side of Bryan's jaw, and over he goes, flat on his face, out for the count, out to the world. Little Tweety birds, like on the cartoons, going around his head. Big knockout. But I mean, Bryan didn't look good in this fight. He didn't look good at all. He's 34. He looked more like 44. And Chaney, you know, it's a good win, I suppose, you know. But where's he going? I don't know. At 36, you got to wonder, haven't you? What's he got? What can he offer? I can think of a dozen heavyweights who'd flatten both these guys. Absolutely flatten them. But it was what it was. It was mildly entertaining. Couple of knockdowns, big spectacular knockout, and it will be interesting to see where Don King takes Mr. Chaney. Bryan, I think, should probably retire, or he probably won't. I hope these guys are getting paid, because whenever I hear Don King, I think of people being ripped off, because you can't find many fighters who have been promoted by Don King who speak well of him. They're nearly a whole slew of them have taken him to court. The best example is probably Tim Witherspoon, who was supposed to be paid £1.5 million to fight Frank Bruno in London back in '86. I remember the fight well. And after deductions, and Don King was his promoter, Carl King was his manager, deductions and so on, tax and so on. Do you know how much out of 1.5 million Tim Witherspoon took home? 33 grand. That kind of sums up Don King and fighters. So yeah, all right. Anyway, enough of that. We all know about Don King. Have a read of him if you're a younger boxing fan. You'll read about Don King, and your eyes will get bigger and bigger the more you read. But anyway. Well done to Cassius Chaney. Commiserations to Trevor Bryan. 7th round knockout for Chaney. If you saw the fight, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about Don King, about the show, about these two fighters? Can either of them, or can Chaney go anywhere now at 36 with this win? Can he get any paydays? Will he keep any of the money? You tell me. Anyway, thanks for your time as always. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and please hit the like button as well, and spread the word about Joe Stunner Boxing. You know it makes sense. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.